Good morning. Our first item today is general questions. Question number one was not lodged. Question number 2, Margaret Mitchell.
Also to ask the Scottish Government what it's doing to tackle fly tipping.
Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Cunningham.
Fly tipping is primarily a matter for local authorities, but it is illegal, it is unnecessary. Valuable resources which could be recycled go to waste, and it creates an expensive problem, often with costs met from the public purse. We have provided the revised Code of Practice on Litter and Refuse, given local authorities and SEPA powers to fine people at least £200 up to a maximum fine of £40,000 if prosecuted. And we've also consulted on new powers to seize vehicles linked to waste crime in our recent circular economy legislation consultation, new powers which could be utilised to tackle fly tipping.
Margaret Mitchell.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. She may recall I raised this issue in June last year with the Minister for Rural Affairs and Natural Environment and pointed out that in England and Wales the court can make an order requiring an individual convicted of fly tipping to pay for the costs of clear-up. Given that one of the aims of the rural crime strategy is to stop organised crime benefiting financially from fly tipping, does the Cabinet Secretary consider that the use of court orders in Scotland to recover the fly tipping clear-up costs would help meet the rural crime strategy's aim, but also, more importantly, provide financial assistance to local authorities and private landowners who currently incur these costs?
Cabinet Secretary.
We will always look at potential, I won't say solutions, but changes that might help the situation. And that would be one of the things that I would need to speak to colleagues in other portfolios about, as the member probably is aware, given her own personal background. There are other things, of course, that are happening. And we do need to remember that any decisions regarding the kind of issue that the member has raised or include others tend to come on the back of a successful court action. And the issue is getting this fly tipping issue into court, which is a matter between the relevant local authorities and the Crown Office. So there are real issues around this, as there often are in these sorts of cases. And we are trying to keep across that. There is also, the member may be aware, the Scottish Partnership Against Rural Crime published their rural crime strategy last year, and fly tipping was one of the 7 priorities for Spark. So we are trying to get on top of this, but I do appreciate the enormous nuisance this causes and the concern to many, many communities.
Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on what plans the Scottish Government has to review the National Litter Strategy?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as the member may realise from what I've said, we are committed to reducing littering and delivering against the National Litter Strategy, which goes quite widely in comparison to the very specific issue of fly tipping. In 2018, we published the updated Code of Practice on Litter and Refuse, and we do intend to bring forward legislation for a new penalty regime for littering from vehicles as part of the Circular Economy Bill, and that was an ask that came from a number of different places. These are commitments we made in the National Litter Strategy, which also contains a commitment to conduct a review in 2020, and we are currently considering how best we can take that review forward this year.
Thank you. Question number 3, Maurice Curry.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to secure and develop services at the Vale of Leven Hospital in light of the announcement that its out-of-hours service unit is to temporarily close at evenings and weekends.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
As the member will know, the NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde is at level 4 escalation. Part of that is for the sustainability and robustness of the out-of-hours services. That involves the turnaround director, Callum Campbell, and an oversight board chaired by NHS Scotland's Chief Operating Officer. The intention is, given that the 9 centres are not sustainable over the recent period, is to pause that, fix 4 of them, and then establish it out to the 9. Meantime, in Western Bartonshire, the Vale of Leven's medical assessment unit remains open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The minor injuries unit is open from 8 a.m. till 9 p.m. every day, including weekends. Overnight GP out-of-hours service continues to operate 7 nights a week from 11 p.m. until 8 a.m. and GP home visiting cover is there for the whole region. With the local campaign group, Hospital Watch, Greater Glasgow and Clyde is working with the Vale of Leven's lead clinician for integrated care and local GPs to improve the robustness of that particular service so that we have full out-of-hours cover over the evenings and at weekends, and that I expect to see in the very near future.
Maurice Corrie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. The serious cutbacks of the out-of-hours service in the Vale of Leven Hospital presents major challenges, for example, for constituents who will struggle to find public transport during antisocial hours to take them to hospital for treatment, and also for already stretched A&E departments who will now face increasing pressure to meet demand. For the sake of the local community care, will the Cabinet Secretary commit to preserving the Vale of Leven services and recognise that this vital lifeline cannot afford to be curtailed without consultation?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, to Mr Corrie, I would make a number of points. First of all, as I've said, home visiting is available throughout the region. Secondly, as I think I've made crystal clear on more than one occasion, I am absolutely committed to the Vale of Leven as an important site of healthcare. There are a number of services that are now available in the Vale, everything from renal dialysis, haematology, day ward, dermatology, birthing unit and so on. And I know that Mr Corrie knows that and is himself personally committed to increasing those services as I am. This is a temporary step. The Vale of Leven's position in terms of out-of-hours will be finalised and completed in its entirety very soon. Those 4 out-of-hours services will then, all the steps taken with advanced nurse practitioners, rotas, GPs engagement and so on, be made robust. That will be the model then to then increase the number of out-of-hours units in a robust way to 6 or 7 and then to 9. Over a period of 12 to 18 months. So all of that work is in hand, but meanwhile, Vale News has produced what I have read for, which is a joint publication from Greater Glasgow and Clyde and Hospital Watch, which sets out what the current services are, some of which will prevent, because they are indeed very effective services, not least a minor injuries unit, that will prevent further pressures on A&E.
Got 2 more members wish to ask on this, so slightly more concise questions and answers. Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the Health Board must fully take on board the issues and the concerns of both residents who go to the Vale of Leven Hospital and also the Inverclyde Royal Hospital to ensure that additional services can actually be introduced at both of these hospitals?
Cabinet Secretary.
And not only do I agree with the member, but I think my commitment in both of those areas is crystal clear. Level 4 escalation allows us to be much more engaged with the board in terms of directing where its priorities should lie and how it delivers those, and we will continue to do that and update members accordingly.
Jackie Bailey.
The Cabinet Secretary came to visit the Vale of Leven Hospital almost a year ago to discuss the out-of-hours service, and she made a very welcome commitment to consider a locally organised and delivered service. Can she therefore explain why NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde thought they could simply ignore this, and what steps she will take to restore the service at the Vale and sack the Chair and Chief Executive of the Health Board?
Cabinet Secretary.
So indeed I did make that visit, and I'm very happy to visit again and meet that campaign group again, as I've discussed previously, most recently with Ms Bailey. It is inexplicable to me why the board did not take up the offer from those GPs, the GPs who themselves actually run many of the services I've just run through. What I can assure Ms Bailey is that that will no longer be ignored, and that those services will continue to benefit from the significant commitment of that GP group in the Vale of Leven, and we will return very swiftly to a full out-of-hours service in the Vale.
Thank you. Question number 4, Beatrice Wishart.
To ask the Scottish Government how it ensures that transport services meet the needs of island communities.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
We are committed to providing a transport system that works for communities across Scotland, including our island communities. That is why, since 2007, despite real terms reductions by the UK Government, the Scottish Government has invested over £2 billion in ferry services across the country. including new routes, new vessels, upgraded harbour infrastructure and cheaper fares. Northlink Ferries recorded a satisfaction rating of 97% last year. Close engagement with communities has been vital to investment in services and will continue as we develop the new Strategic Transport Projects Review and the successor to the Ferries Plan.
Beatrice Wishart.
I thank the Minister for his answer. I've been contacted by several constituents and visitors to Shetland who have complained about the high cost of getting to the Isles. I know of someone who was charged almost £500 for the return flights from Edinburgh to visit family in Shetland for Christmas. When families have crises and need to travel to or from the mainland, these costs make a situation that is already stressful even worse. The Government has a role in these extortionate costs as the owner of High Isle. Does the Minister agree with me that Isles passengers are being penalised, and will he set out what the Government will do to make sure that people are not charged over the odds?
Minister.
Well, I think the first thing to say is to acknowledge to Beatrice Wishart and indeed other islands representatives, we recognise the challenges that island communities face in actually making journeys to the mainland and the high costs that there are of travel. Obviously, the Government is doing everything we can to try and maintain the lower costs for those that are having to either commute to the mainland or indeed travel for business or pleasure. And we will continue to do that. My colleague Michael Matheson is obviously clearly working very hard to ensure that High Isle takes its responsibilities to island communities seriously, but I'm more than happy to meet with Ms Wishart to discuss any particular issues that she's aware of and take that forward with my colleagues.
Rhoda Grant.
The 18-19 budget granted £10.5 million funding for inter-island ferry services in Orkney and Shetland. This came with a promise of finding a sustainable solution for inter-island ferry services, which are a lifeline to their communities. Can I ask when these islands can expect to find a sustainable solution for inter-island ferry services?
Minister.
Well, clearly, the Government is keen to work with all parties in this chamber as we approach budget process, and I know Ms Forbes is hoping to cement the budget in Parliament very shortly. But I would certainly encourage the member to engage with me. As she knows, we've been working very hard with Orkney Islands Council, Shetland Islands Council, Argyll and Bute Council to try and find long-term solutions for their internal ferry services. I'm pleased to say we have provided a solution this year in the budget, should it be approved by Parliament, to resolve issues in Argyll and Bute. We have continued discussions with Orkney Islands Council and Shetland Islands Council. There are specific issues in relation to both, differences in terms of their fit with the routes and services model, with fare structures, and indeed with the funding arrangements as they already stand, and they are complex, but I certainly would commit to the member we can continue those discussions with colleagues in both Orkney Islands and Shetland Islands and try and come to a solution as soon as we can.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Minister, in light of the Scottish Government's decision to extend free bus travel to under-18s, what consideration will it give to allowing young island residents on islands such as Cumbria and Arran, for example, to travel free on ferries?
Minister.
Well, I certainly recognise Mr Gibson's strong commitment to trying to resolve and improve indeed services for residents in Cumbria and Arran and other parts of his constituency. We have committed to a national concessionary travel scheme for free bus travel for those aged 18 and under from January 2021, subject to the completion of the necessary preparations, including due diligence and research. We'll be engaging with young people across the country to ensure that all areas benefit from these measures. Existing support is provided for young people on ferries through the Young Scot National Entitlement Card, namely for young people aged between 16 to 18 who live in islands, who receive in turn 4 vouchers for a single trip or 2 returns from islands to the mainland. In addition, under 16s travel for half the adult fare and under 5s travel completely free. But obviously keen to hear from Mr Gibson if he has any specific proposals.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you. This year's budget has shown that once again the Scottish Government has no serious ambition to genuinely deliver fair funding for Orkney and Shetland's ferries. So can I ask the Minister, will he go into next year's Scottish Parliament elections once again making promises to the islands that he has no intention whatsoever of keeping?
Minister.
I think the member has some degree of brass neck, Presiding Officer, on this issue. It is Mr Halcrow-Johnson's colleagues in the UK Government who have failed to provide a budget in advance of the Scottish Government budget that creates significant uncertainty. that creates significant uncertainty for the Finance Secretary and this government in pushing forward a budget in advance of knowing what we are going to receive from UK ministers. Now, if the member is serious about commitments to fair funding for services in Orkney Islands and Shetland Counties, I'm sure he must have made representations to Ms Forbes in the budget process to include additional funding for ferries in Orkney Islands and Shetland Councils. If he has not, he is guilty of gross hypocrisy, and that's something that he should reflect on.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given news this week of the agreement between the Council and the Scottish Government over funding a replacement for the Golden Mariana, can the Minister confirm that this will now pave the way for agreement for the replacement of other vessels within a fleet that provides a genuine lifeline to the island communities in the constituency of Orkney that I represent?
Minister.
Well, the first thing I would do, in all seriousness, I know this is a genuine question on behalf of Mr MacArthur and his constituents, that in terms of the agreement we are trying to reach with Orkney Islands Council, yes, we are trying to provide additional funding to help with that particular instance. We've got ongoing discussion with Orkney Islands Council, as Mr MacArthur will know, about the longer-term position for Orkney Islands ferries. Clearly, these are complex, as I outlined in my answer to Rhoda Grant, around differences in fare structures, alignment with the RSM model, which in the case of Orkney we believe is below the RSM standard, and we are having ongoing discussions with Orkney Islands Council. These are not easy matters given the funding constraints we live in, but I assure Mr MacArthur and indeed Mr Halker-Johnson that we are continuing to have those discussions with the Council and will look to try and find a long-term solution for the islands.
And David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Minister will be well aware of the breaking news overnight that regional airline Flybe has collapsed, with 2,000 jobs at risk across the United Kingdom. Will the Minister raise this issue urgently with the First Minister, who I know is in her place, to assess the job losses in Scotland and provide specific aviation support in Highlands and Islands, such as endorsing the public service obligation for Wick to Aberdeen service? Minister.
Well, these are very important matters. I know the First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary, Mr Matheson, or actually Mr Matheson is very much actively dealing with this at present, and reassure the member. This is obviously a very serious situation, and first of all, I should say our thoughts about the staff that are involved in Flybe. It's obviously a horrendous situation they face, and obviously for those customers who've been affected by the actions overnight. In relation to the Highlands Islands region, which the member represents, I just want to put on record, Flybe do not operate in any of the islands at present, but Flybe's franchise partner, Eastern Airways, operates the Aberdeen Wick service, and they have confirmed they'll continue to operate this, which is obviously great news for those served by the Wick Airport.
Question number 5, Jamie Halker-Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government how it will ensure that all information required and requested by the OECD as part of the review of the Curriculum for Excellence will be made available.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
President Officer, the OECD has provided the Scottish Government with guidance on the gathering of background information and evidence to inform the review. We will be working closely with our national partners to provide a comprehensive evidence base at the outset and to ensure that the review process itself captures the views, experiences of a broad range of partners, practitioners and learners.
Jamie Halker-Johnson.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for the answer. He'll be aware that the Education Committee of this Parliament has on several occasions found it difficult to access all the necessary data from Scotland's education agencies. He'll also know that several of Scotland's education experts have been concerned that Scotland is not as data-rich as it should be when it comes to measuring educational attainment. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what actions the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that there is better qualitative evidence available ahead of the OECD review, covering a breadth of areas?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm afraid Mr Halker-Johnson is having a bad day on the questions today, Presiding Officer, because Scotland has never had more information about the performance of individual pupils through our education system at any point in the last 20 or 30 years. And that has come about. And that has come about by the reforms that this government has made to ensure that we deliver improvements in performance. We now know the information about the performance of young people at Curriculum for Excellence levels, at early level, level 1, level 2, level 3, information that was never available in the past. So Mr Halker-Johnson needs to get up to date with the statistics and understand the reforms this government has put in place and why young people in our country should be proud of the performance they're delivering in Scottish education.
Question 6, Joanne Lamond.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what support it provides to young disabled people in the transition to adulthood.
Minister Marie Todd.
Presiding Officer, there are already a number of policies and initiatives underway to support the needs of disabled children and young people going through transitions, but we all recognise the need for something more. A number of important aspects of transitions are already covered by legislation in Scotland. Across the Scottish Government directorates, there are over 30 projects or programmes already being progressed to effect real change to the transitions experience for our young people. We will build on this to maximise impact through greater coordination of work across Scottish Government. We'll also ensure that planning for transitions is integrated into good practice through the upcoming refresh of the Getting It Right for Every Child policy and practice guidance. We'll ensure that the voices of lived experience of children and young people and families feature strongly in our policy development.
Fran Lamont.
Thank you. I'm sure the Minister is aware of how important a time this is for young disabled people as they face transition to adulthood. But despite what she says, the provision simply is not working, and young disabled people face significant barriers because of their disability. The Minister may also be aware of my proposed Members' Bill, which seeks to address the absence of support for disabled young people as they become adults. Given the powerful testimonies I have received in response to my consultation about the lack of serious planning and the abandonment of families at this important time, will the Cabinet Secretary agree to meet with me to discuss my bill proposal and how best we secure the rights of disabled young people to secure the support they need to achieve their potential as adults?
Minister.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now, before we turn to First Minister's questions, I'm sure members would like to join me in welcoming to our gallery the Right Honourable Catherine Hara MP, Speaker of the Parliament of Malawi.